The Cloverfield Paradox is a Netflix movie that came completely out of nowhere. For the longest time we've heard that, oh, Cloverfield 3 has already been made. It was under the name The God Particle. And we've heard a lot about when this movie would be coming out. There was a story that Paramount would be sending it over to Netflix and just skipping a theatrical release. So we thought, okay, it's going to Netflix. When's it coming out? And then all of a sudden, without any time to prepare, Netflix dropped a trailer during Super Bowl and then released the actual movie as soon as the Super Bowl was done. So as soon as the Super Bowl was done, everyone but myself watched the Cloverfield Paradox. I didn't watch the movie until the next day. So what's this movie about? Because all the Cloverfield movies have been very different from each other. This one takes place in a space station. A team of people are sent up into outer space to try to test a machine that will supposedly fix the planet's energy crisis. So they test the machine out, and unfortunately they get teleported out of nowhere far from Earth. Are they light years away from Earth? Are they in another dimension? They don't really know, but a lot of weird things start happening all over the spaceship. People start to distrust one another, and weird things start happening on Earth as well. So a little brief history right here. I'm not a big fan of the first Cloverfield movie. I didn't dislike it. I just think it's okay. As a big monster movie fan, I appreciate the idea of a found footage monster movie because it's something that the genre has never done before. But the characters are just annoying as fuck, and I wasn't a big fan of the ending. 10 Cloverfield Lane, on the other hand, was one of my favorite movies of the year it came out. I thought it was incredibly thrilling. It had fantastic performances from John Goodman and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Some people are very conflicted about the ending of the movie where aliens pop up. I actually really like the ending because without that ending, it wouldn't really be that much of a Cloverfield movie to begin with. You'd had to have something supernatural. And with this movie, this is shit right here. I'm just gonna be flat out honest with you guys. This sucked. This movie's mission statement was something that we really didn't need to begin with. It was going to explain why all the events in Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane happened, and basically just give us all the answers to questions that we really didn't need to begin with. And with this movie, we got some answers, but also a shit ton of questions. This is a mess of a movie, and I can honestly see why Paramount decided to opt out with a theatrical release and just dump it on Netflix, because Netflix might be great at making TV shows, but when it comes to producing movies or picking up movies, they're awful. They're the only studio that keeps giving Adam Sandler work. They had their statement out there about Bright, how critics just don't understand what makes a movie, which I didn't see Bright, so I can't really judge it based on the film, but I hate it when a studio or a person's response to bad reviews is that the critics don't understand it. And then with the Cloverfield Paradox, since I've actually seen it, it just really paints a clear picture of Netflix is terrible with their movies. Again, whether it's Netflix originals or pickups. I just reviewed a Netflix pickup not too long ago, A Futile and Stupid Gesture, and I wasn't that big a fan of it to begin with. What we have here is just a generic space station movie. If you've seen Life, if you've seen Alien, if you've seen The Thing, if you've seen any kind of movie that either takes place in space or within a claustrophobic environment, you've seen the Cloverfield Paradox, and you've seen it done a whole lot better than in this movie. It's a much cheaper version than all of those other movies that I mentioned. Now, let me first say there are some recognizable actors in this movie, and some of the special effects are actually pretty good. What I mean by cheap, though, is that there are about 3 or 4 rooms within this whole space station, and that's being generous. And even though there are some pretty good visual effects here and there, sometimes they'll have explosions going on, or they'll have something that really requires some CGI to happen, but they just show character reactions. It's something that you'd see in an Asylum production or on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's almost embarrassing at how cheap this movie can be at some points. And also, there are too many things going on in terms of trying to make you feel claustrophobic or scared. I mean, the space station that the characters are on ends up being far from Earth, so that alone should be a big problem. But then there are a lot of scenarios throughout the movie that deal with body horror. There are scenarios that end up with paranoid characters that start dying left and right, just a bunch of weird supernatural stuff that happens throughout the spaceship, and I'm like, Pick one thing for us to focus on. We don't need to have every little single random detail happen throughout this entire space station, because sometimes they introduce things that just come out of the blue without any explanation. And I'm for movies most of the time to be very vague. But this is a scenario where it's like, no, you need to stick on this. You need to explain this in a little more detail than just brushing it off. I'm not going to go into full details because I want to avoid spoilers, but let's just say we find a character in this movie who's in a scenario that character should not be able to get out of. And once they get this character out of this scenario, the movie just seems to brush it off as if it's nothing. And speaking of characters, most of them are just one-dimensional cliches. You have the angry captain, who's played by David Oyelowo. You have the funny guy, who's actually not that funny, played by Chris O'Dowd. You have the token Asian character in here, played by Zhang Ziyi from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, House of Flying Daggers, The Grandmaster, Memoirs of a Geisha, and she's supposed to be in Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong. And what really gets me about her character here is that she only speaks Chinese. We've seen her speak English in other movies beforehand, but what's even more confusing is that there are other characters that speak Chinese as well, but then there are scenarios like in Star Wars where everyone just understands each other's languages, and it's just sloppy. It is like absolutely lazy writing, and that probably is the biggest flaw of the movie. The screenplay. Everything feels like it's made up on the spot. There's no real explanation to a lot of the stuff that's happening. There's even a sequence where they show a TV interview where you have a character explain in detail everything that's going to eventually happen throughout the movie, and I just thought, wow, that is incredibly lazy and half-assed. It's terrible. This movie just doesn't even feel like it was meant to be a Cloverfield movie to begin with. All of the sequences that you see that try to tie it back to the first Cloverfield feels like they were added in at the last minute. It's like they got finished with the movie, everything was done, they were ready to release it in theaters, and then somebody thought, we need to make this a Cloverfield movie. So they had to do reshoots or just add certain sequences to try and make it connect to the previous films. And it just has no purpose being in the same movie as this dull, stuck on a space station movie. It's almost frustrating at how lazy the connections to Cloverfield are, especially with the last shot of the movie. When they showed the last shot of the movie and once they cut to credits, all I thought to myself was, you are fucking kidding me, aren't you? Really? This is how you end the movie? Now, there is actually one thing in this movie that I do like. I've said that all the characters are just stereotyped cliches, but there is one actress in this movie that actually really stood out, and that's the lead actress. I'm going to try to pronounce her name. Gugu Mbatha-Raw. Gugu Mbatha-Raw. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But anyway, she's the main character of the movie. She's kind of like the Ripley to this movie. But anyway, her character is the best of the movie, and her performance is actually pretty damn good. We actually get to know some of her backstory, and we get to really identify with her as a character and see what she's going through. And she's the only character that you really care about. Everyone else in this movie is just flat out expendable, and everyone else gives bad performances. There is no other performance in this movie outside of hers that I can look at and go, yeah, that person did a good job. No, it's like, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you were excellent, you were bad. So I don't have much else good to say about this movie. I'm not too invested in the Cloverfield series to try to come up with all these fan theories or try to connect the other two movies with this one. As much as I adore 10 Cloverfield Lane, I could just look at it as a standalone movie and that's it. That's the only Cloverfield movie that I'd be willing to watch more than once. With the first Cloverfield movie, they're just better monster movies out there, and with this movie, this sucks altogether. And I actually had to wait a few days before I actually did my review just to process what I saw and just kind of sit on it, see how I felt. Because my initial thought when this was done was, I would say watch at your own risk, because it does start off pretty good, but then it just kind of delves into shit by the time the space station disappears. But then I kept thinking back at all the scenarios that happened once the conflict starts, and I just thought, no, this is terrible. There are some things in this movie that are just flat out inexcusable, but it never made me mad. So in the end, Well, I can't really say don't waste your money because you wouldn't actually be spending money to see this. So with this one-time edit to this rating, don't waste your time. There's really no reason to watch this movie. In an attempt to try to connect the past two movies, you will just end up being more confused and not at all satisfied with what the movie has to offer. The characters are dull except for your lead. The visual effects are pretty good at points, but the movie is also very lazy and feels very cheap. I don't recommend this at all. It's terrible. That's all I have to say. This movie flat out sucks. And that's my review for the Cloverfield Paradox. I feel like if they're going to continue making Cloverfield movies, because apparently they've already made the fourth one, put some more effort into this. Let's hope we get another 10 Cloverfield Lane and not another Cloverfield Paradox. Because if we get another one of these movies, this very unique series could end up being in big trouble. So we'll see what happens with a fourth Cloverfield movie, and until then, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.